Have you ever had one of those days where everything is technically fine, but you just feel this low-grade anxiety kind of thrumming in the background?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, all the time.
Right. Like, picture this. It's 8 p.m. on a Tuesday. Your bills are paid, the doors are locked, nobody is, currently chasing you with a sharp object.
Right.
But you're sitting on your couch trying to watch a show, and your body is just buzzing with this vague, inexplicable sense of dread.
Yeah, that buzz, it's so uncomfortable.
It is. Or, maybe it happens at work. You get a slightly ambiguous email from your boss, just 2 sentences, and suddenly you have this impenetrable brain fog right when you need to be sharpest.
And then, what often follows is this really profound sense of guilt about it.
Yes, like you should be able to just handle it.
Exactly. We tell ourselves, I just need to pull it together. I need to change my mindset. Because for decades, we've been deeply conditioned to view consciousness and our emotional baseline purely as a software problem.
Software problem.
Right. We operate under this assumption that if we can just run the right mental program or think the right positive thoughts or cognitively reframe it hard enough, the body will just obey.
Like it'll just click into place.
Yeah, but it doesn't.
Okay, let's unpack this because that assumption is exactly what we are completely dismantling today.
It really is.
Welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
We are exploring some truly paradigm-shifting source material today from the Red Frequency Files. It's called Whole Body Coherence and Consciousness.
It's fascinating material.
It really is. And the core thesis here is going to fundamentally change the way you look at your own physical form. Because, well, what this material reveals is that we don't have a software problem at all. We have a hardware issue.
A physical, biological hardware issue.
Exactly. True coherence, so the state of stable clarity, emotional regulation, sharp intuition. It's not a top-down brain event. It's a synchronized physical state involving at least 3 distinct intelligent systems: the brain, the heart, and the gut.
And when those 3 primary systems are out of sync, you get this fragmented physiological signal.
Like static.
Yeah, exactly, like static. And that fragmented signal is exactly what you are experiencing when you get that inexplicable Tuesday night anxiety.
Yeah.
Or that, sudden paralyzing decision fatigue at work.
So it's not a failure of character.
No, absolutely not. It's not a lack of willpower. It is a coherence failure at the foundational hardware level.
Wow.
And what's fascinating here is that true coherence isn't some esoteric mystical concept. It's not a poetic metaphor. It is a highly measurable, objective physiological state.
Where these massive neural networks are either communicating seamlessly or they're just actively interfering with one another.
Right, and creating that static.
So if we are going to fix the hardware, we have to look at the individual components first.
Right.
Before we see how they connect.
Definitely.
And we have to start with the most famous, probably the most overhyped piece of the puzzle, which is the brain.
Oh, heavily overhyped.
Right. Culturally, we just have this ingrained idea that the brain is the unilateral commander-in-chief, like the absolute boss sitting up in the skull tower dictating everything that happens below.
Yeah, but diving into the actual mechanics of consciousness, the brain gets a massive demotion here.
A demotion.
A necessary one, yeah. If we want an accurate model of human functioning, the brain is undeniably the central processing unit. It handles our language, our logic, conscious planning.
Racial awareness, all that stuff.
Right. But neurologically speaking, it acts far less as a dictator issuing commands and much more as a receiver and an interpreter of signals surging up from below.
So it's constantly just like reading the room of your body.
Yes, exactly. It relies on the data it receives to construct your reality. So when a systemic stress response kicks in, the very part of the brain you rely on to think your way out of the stress is the first physiological casualty.
Wait, really? The part you need the most just drops out?
It does. Let's look at the prefrontal cortex.
Right, the executive function center.
Yeah, the part of you that reads a spreadsheet or plans a vacation. The part that realizes that the ambiguous email from your boss isn't actually a physical threat to your survival.
Right.
Under stress, the biological mechanism completely shifts. Elevated cortisol and adrenaline literally alter the vascular system in your head.
They physically change the blood flow.
Yes. They constrict blood vessels in the prefrontal cortex and dramatically redirect that blood flow deeper into the brain, straight to the amygdala.
A threat detection center.
Exactly.
Okay, so I love this analogy. Trying to think your way out of a panic attack is kind of like the CEO of a company trying to issue calm, strategic orders from the parking lot.
Because they've been locked out.
Right.
Yeah.
Because the overly aggressive security guards, the amygdala, have locked the doors, seized the PA system, and are just blasting air horns into every hallway.
That's incredibly active. You cannot use the hijacked organ to fix the hijacking.
Because the metabolic resources just aren't there anymore.
They're literally not available in the prefrontal cortex. The amygdala is blasting an alarm state. And when this happens, the electromagnetic synchronization of the brain completely shatters.
It shatters.
Yeah. You enter a state of high entropy signaling. Neuroscientists refer to it as neural noise.
Neural noise, that perfectly describes it. It feels like mental static. Your thoughts are fragmented, jumping from one worst-case scenario to the next.
Because the cohesive rhythmic firing of the neurons has just broken down into chaos.
So if the brain acts as a receiver and interpreter of these signals, we have to understand the channels it operates on before we can clear that noise, right?
Exactly. We operate in multiple frequency bands simultaneously.
Right, measured by an EEG.
Yeah.
Let's look at the actual physics of this, because we have different states of coherence corresponding to different dominant brain waves. Start with beta waves.
So beta waves oscillate between roughly 13 to 30 hertz. This is the channel where most of us live our normal waking lives.
The analytical thinking, active problem solving.
Right. But high beta, when you start pushing up toward that 30 hertz mark, that is the frequency of pure stress, anxiety, hypervigilance.
That's that fragmented thought pattern we were just talking about.
Yes. Beta is the state of doing and calculating, but as you slow the electrical frequencies down, you enter alpha waves.
Which are 8 to 12 hertz.
Yes. And this is relaxed, present moment awareness. It's a profoundly important gateway state. Alpha basically acts as the biological bridge between your conscious analytical mind and your subconscious.
So if you're an athlete, this is the zone.
Or a flow state, yeah. If you're a meditator, you'd call it stillness. It's highly efficient because it allows for rapid information processing without the massive metabolic drain of high beta.
Okay, so what's below alpha?
You drop into theta, 4 to 7 hertz, deep meditation, intuition, creative insight.
Oh, is this that bizarre sort of transient state right before you fall asleep?
The hypnagogic state,
Okay,
yes, where you suddenly get a brilliant idea for a problem you've been stuck on all day.
I love that state.
It's powerful. And then, way down at the very bottom, oscillating at a slow, sweeping 0.5 hertz to 3 hertz, you have delta waves.
Which is deep, dreamless, restorative sleep.
Exactly.
But then, wait, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, way up top, you have gamma waves, right?
Yes, oscillating between 30 and 100 hertz.
And gamma is linked to heightened perception, rapid binding of complex sensory info like peak consciousness.
Very much so. Experienced meditators, like Tibetan monks, often show elevated, sustained gamma coherence across multiple brain regions at once.
So I have to play devil's advocate here.
Okay.
If gamma is this ultimate state of peak consciousness, shouldn't our goal be to just exist in gamma all the time? I mean, why do we need the slow, plodding frequencies if high-frequency gamma is the pinnacle of human awareness?
What's fascinating here is that the human nervous system operates as an interdependent stack.
An interdependent stack, okay.
Yeah, you cannot isolate the top floor of a skyscraper and expect it to float in the air without a foundation. If you attempt to force the brain into constant high-frequency states without the restorative depth of the lower frequencies, the entire biological architecture just collapses.
Feel you'd burn out.
Absolutely. Without sufficient time spent in delta sleep, for instance, your brain absolutely cannot perform its basic metabolic housekeeping.
Right. So true brain coherence isn't about just being pegged at the maximum frequency all the time.
No, not at all. It's about neuroplasticity, flexibility. It is the ability of different regions of the brain to synchronize their oscillations, to fire in coordinated rhythmic patterns, and to shift smoothly from beta to alpha to theta depending on the environment.
So the goal isn't forcing the brain to play one note at maximum volume. It's having the flexibility to let the whole orchestra play the right chord together.
Beautifully put. And a crucial part of directing that orchestra involves managing a specific set of structures called the default mode network, or the DMN.
The DMN, what does that do?
So, the DMN is a widespread network of interconnected brain regions that heavily activates when you are not focused on a specific external demanding task.
Oh, so it's the network that hums to life when your mind wanders.
Yes.
Yeah.
When you engage in self-referential thought, like when you're standing in the shower replaying a past argument from 5 years ago.
Oh, wow. Or imagining some disastrous future outcome that hasn't happened yet.
Exactly.
The rumination network, that's the mental drift that pulls you out of the present moment.
Yeah, and chronic unmanaged DMN overactivation is deeply structurally associated with depression, anxiety, and those exhausting mental loops most people just call overthinking.
And that takes a lot of energy, right?
It is a massive consumer of glucose in the brain. But when you engage in physiological coherence practices, you consistently see a measurable downregulation of DMN activity.
It quiets down.
It does. The brain shifts out of that internal rumination and improves its engagement with task-positive networks. You experience true presence. But to achieve that synchronized, quiet brain state, we can't just look at the brain in isolation.
Right, we have to look outside the skull. We have to discover where the strongest incoming signals are actually coming from.
Exactly.
And here's where it gets really interesting for me. If the brain is the receiver tuning into these frequencies, who is broadcasting the loudest signal?
Right? Who's holding the mic?
Exactly. And that brings us to system 2, the heart. And this completely flips the script on traditional biology.
It really does.
Because we are taught that the heart is just a mechanical pump, just a dumb muscle moving blood around. But the research, like from the Heart Math Institute, reveals that the heart is a highly complex sensory organ.
It is incredibly complex. It contains an intrinsic cardiac nervous system made up of approximately 40,000 sensory neurites.
40,000 neurons in the heart.
Yes, a neural network so dense and complex that neurocardiology literally classifies it as a functional heart brain.
A heart brain. It processes information, it has short-term memory, it makes functional decisions independently.
Yes, and it sends complex signals to the cranial brain completely independently of the central nervous system.
This represents just a profound shift in how we understand human physiology.
A total paradigm shift. And to truly grasp the mechanics here, we have to look closely at the vagus nerve.
Cranial nerve 10.
Right. The vagus nerve is the primary biological communication pathway between the brain and the body's internal organs.
It's the superhighway.
It is. Now, for a very long time, the medical assumption was that the brain was using this massive nerve cable to micromanage the organs, right? Firing commands downward.
Like stomach, digest this, heart, beat faster.
Exactly. But the actual mapping of the vagus nerve shows something completely counterintuitive. Approximately 80 to 90% of vagal nerve fibers are afferent.
Meaning they travel upward?
Yes. They carry information from the body, specifically the heart and the gut, up to the brain, not the other way around.
80 to 90% upward traffic.
It's staggering.
To use an analogy, we've always thought the brain was standing at a podium giving a relentless lecture to the rest of the body. But based on this, the brain is actually conducting an interview and the heart is doing all the talking.
That is exactly right. The heart is sending significantly more information to the brain than the brain is sending to the heart.
That single fact completely dismantles the illusion that your rational thinking mind is running the show.
It dismantles it entirely. And the language the heart uses to communicate this vast amount of data to the brain is encoded in heart rate variability.
HRV.
Or HRV, yes. Now, common sense might tell you that a healthy heart beats like a perfect, rigid metronome, ticking away exactly once per second at 60 beats per minute.
Right, perfectly steady.
But biologically, that rigidity is actually a sign of severe pathology or imminent failure.
Wait, really? A perfectly steady heartbeat is bad?
Very bad. A resilient, healthy heart exhibits natural, continuous variation in the time intervals between consecutive beats.
This constant micro-variation.
Yes. Driven by an ongoing tug-of-war between the sympathetic nervous system, which acts as the gas pedal to accelerate your heart rate, and the parasympathetic nervous system, driven by the vagus nerve, which acts as the brake to slow it down.
So high HRV is essentially the holy grail. It's a marker of profound biological resilience.
Exactly. It means your nervous system is incredibly agile. It can hit the gas when you need to sprint for a bus, but the moment the stressor is gone, it immediately hits the brakes and recovers.
So high HRV is a responsive system.
Mm-hmm.
What about low HRV?
Low HRV means you are physiologically stuck. The brake pedal is essentially broken.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's heavily associated with chronic systemic stress, widespread inflammation, poor emotional regulation, and significantly reduced cognitive performance.
But, and this is the hopeful part, through specific targeted techniques like HRD biofeedback, you can consciously train your heart to shift into a coherent state.
You absolutely can. When you actively generate specific, sustained emotional states, typically appreciation, deep care, or compassion, the heart's electrical rhythm physically changes.
The erratic waveforms smooth out.
Yes. The irregular, jagged waveforms of a stressed heart organize into highly rhythmic, rolling sine wave patterns at approximately zero point 0.1 hertz.
Zero point 0.1 hertz. And this is called resonance frequency coherence.
Correct.
And when the heart hits that zero point 0.1 hertz resonance frequency, the effects don't just stay localized in your chest cavity. Which brings us to the electromagnetic field. And this is a part of the deep dive that completely blew my mind.
It's incredible science.
The heart generates an electromagnetic field that extends several feet outside the physical boundary of the human body. And we aren't guessing about this. We can measure it right now with magnetocardiography.
You can measure it perfectly.
The heart's electrical field is about 100 times stronger than the brain's electrical field. And its magnetic field is up to 5,000 times stronger than the brain's. 5,000 times.
This raises an important question about the actual boundaries of our internal states.
Where do we end?
Exactly. The data suggests that this massive toroidal electromagnetic field actually encodes complex emotional and physiological information. It radiates outward continuously.
And it impacts others.
Yes. It has the measurable capacity to influence the neural processing and brainwave synchronization of other people in close physical proximity.
So in practical terms, your internal state of coherence or chaotic incoherence is not contained within your skin.
Not at all. It feeds back into your own nervous system, certainly, but it also physically, electromagnetically impacts the room you are standing in.
Which perfectly explains why you can walk into a conference room where two people were just having a vicious whispered argument, and before anyone even looks at you or says a word, you can instantly feel the tension in the air.
You can feel the incoherence.
Yes. Or why sitting next to someone who is deeply, profoundly calm literally lowers your own heart rate and softens your breathing.
What?
It's not just you subconsciously reading their body language. It is a literal, measurable electromagnetic interaction between two heart fields.
It's physics. And internally, when your heart enters that coherent sine wave state and broadcasts that organized rhythmic signal, it travels right up those vagal nerve fibers directly to the thalamus and the amygdala in the brain.
And this gives you what researchers call intuitive access.
Exactly. The background static of the brain quiets down, and your higher cognitive functions actually work better because the heart is feeding the brain high-fidelity, hypercoherent data.
The brain finally gets a clear signal.
Yes, allowing it to process external reality accurately rather than through the lens of a threat response.
Wow. But the heart is ultimately the electrical and magnetic generator in this three-part system. If we want to understand the raw chemical building blocks that dictate the emotional states the heart and brain are trying to process, we have to travel further down the vagus nerve.
Down to System 3.
System 3, the gut, the chemical factory. And if you thought the heart having 40,000 neurons was impressive, the gut completely dwarfs it.
It's not even close.
The gastrointestinal tract contains an estimated 500 million neurons,
500 million.
organized into this intricate web called the enteric nervous system, the ENS. It's so sprawling that scientists literally refer to it as the second brain.
Right, because the ENS can manage complex digestion, local immune responses, and intricate hormonal signaling entirely on its own, with absolutely zero command input from the brain in your head.
If you severed the vagus nerve, the gut would just keep doing its job.
It would. And just like the heart, the communication traffic along the vagus nerve from the gut is predominantly moving upward. Your gut is constantly sending vast amounts of interpretive data about your internal chemical environment up into your CPU.
And that upward stream shapes your baseline mood, sensory perception, cognitive agility, long before a conscious thought ever forms in your prefrontal cortex.
Long before. But to truly understand the gut's immense power, we have to look past the neurons and look at the workforce operating inside that factory.
The microbiome?
The microbiome. You are currently hosting an intricate ecosystem of approximately 38 trillion microorganisms. Bacteria, fungi, viruses.
They outnumber human cells.
They do. And this is not just a passive passenger population waiting in the dark for you to digest your lunch. They are highly active participants in the synthesis and regulation of your neurotransmitters.
And this part completely reframes the entire concept of mental health for me, because the statistics here are just staggering. Approximately 95% of the body's serotonin is produced in the gut, not the brain.
95%.
And serotonin isn't just some superficial mood molecule that makes you happy. It's a critical, functional neurotransmitter. It regulates bowel motility, sleep architecture, appetite. It plays a central foundational role in the entire gut-brain communication network.
And the gut bacteria directly influence this massive production by stimulating specific cells in the gut lining called enterochromaffin cells.
It doesn't stop at serotonin.
No, the gut microbiome is responsible for synthesizing massive amounts of GABA.
GABA, the anxiety reducer.
Exactly. Gamma-aminobutyric acid. It's the primary inhibitory neurotransmitter in the human nervous system. It acts as the chemical brake pedal. It is the exact substance that turns down excessive neural firing and stops acute anxiety.
And the bacteria make this.
Specific strains of gut bacteria, particularly species within the Lactobacillus and Bifidobacterium genera, directly metabolize glutamate to synthesize GABA.
Wow.
So when your microbiome is disrupted and those populations die off, your GABA availability drops precipitously, and your baseline anxiety and stress reactivity directly, measurably increase.
And the gut also produces roughly 50% of the body's dopamine, right? The molecule that dictates drive, motivation, reward processing.
Yes, 50%.
Wait, hold on. I have to push back here.
Sure.
Because there's a massive biological roadblock that everyone brings up when we talk about gut neurotransmitters. If my gut produces 50% of my dopamine, how does that actually help my focus? Doesn't the blood-brain barrier act like a strict border patrol?
It does?
I thought massive neurotransmitter molecules like dopamine and serotonin produced in the gut couldn't physically cross the blood-brain barrier to get into the brain where they're needed. So how does that actually work?
That is exactly the right question to ask, and it highlights why the hardware system is so elegantly interconnected. You are correct. The dopamine and serotonin produced in the gut do not generally cross the blood-brain barrier directly.
Okay, so they're stuck down there.
But they don't need to cross. The neurotransmitters produced in the gut act locally on the enteric nervous system, and they stimulate the afferent fibers of the vagus nerve. They are essentially sending a Morse code signal up the vagus nerve to the brain. That vagal stimulation directly triggers the brain to alter its own synthesis of neurotransmitters.
So it's remote control.
Exactly. Furthermore, the gut microbiome produces the precursor molecules like tryptophan for serotonin and short-chain fatty acids like butyrate. And those absolutely do cross the blood-brain barrier and heavily influence the brain's own chemical production.
That makes perfect sense. The gut is sending the signal and shipping the raw materials, even if the final product stays local.
Right. It's a highly sophisticated remote control mechanism. So if your microbiome is severely unbalanced, a state called dysbiosis, you are fundamentally disrupting both the signaling mechanism and the availability of chemical precursors required for motivation.
But the danger of dysbiosis goes so much further than just neurotransmitters. The breakdown of this system actively degrades the coherence of the entire brain and heart network through one mechanism: systemic inflammation.
Inflammation is the real destroyer here.
Because when the microbial community in your gut is out of balance, the actual physical lining of your GI tract begins to fail. It becomes excessively permeable.
Leaky gut.
Right. To visualize this, think of your gut lining as an exclusive, highly regulated nightclub. The physical structures holding the cells together are called tight junctions. They are the bouncers. Their entire job is to let the nutrients in and keep the toxins out.
I like that analogy.
But in a state of dysbiosis, driven by poor diet or chronic stress, those tight junctions degrade. The bouncers fall asleep.
Yes, and this allows massive bacterial byproducts, specifically endotoxins called lipopolysaccharides, or LPS, to escape the digestive tract and flood into the bloodstream.
And once the LPS rioters are out of the nightclub and into the bloodstream, all hell breaks loose.
Precisely. The body's immune system detects these highly inflammatory LPS molecules circulating in the blood and triggers a massive systemic multi-organ inflammatory response.
And how does that affect the brain?
If we connect this to the bigger picture of brain coherence, chronic systemic inflammation inevitably leads to neuroinflammation. The inflammatory cytokines travel through the bloodstream, cross the blood-brain barrier, and activate the microglia, which are the brain's immune cells.
So the brain physically becomes inflamed.
Yes. Neuroinflammation is now recognized as a primary driver of treatment-resistant depression, severe anxiety disorders, rapid cognitive decline, and the complete disruption of your sleep architecture.
So a dysbiotic gut is not just giving you occasional bloating. It is actively generating chemical static that profoundly degrades the physical coherence capacity of both your brain and your heart.
It's degrading the entire network.
So what does this all mean? We have the brain acting as the central receiver and interpreter, the heart acting as the electrical rhythmic driver, and the gut acting as the chemical factory and signaling base.
The three intelligence systems.
How did these three distinct, physically separated systems actually talk to each other in real time to create a unified sense of you?
The underlying research describes this as the gut-brain-heart axis. It's the primary communications superhighway of the human body, mapped out over decades by researchers, relying heavily on Stephen Porges and polyvagal theory.
And the central structural wire of this entire network is the vagus nerve.
Absolutely. And the definitive metric we use to gauge the operational health of this superhighway is called vagal tone.
Vagal.
Vagal tone is arguably the single most important measurable physiological indicator of whole body coherence. It represents the baseline level of activity, strength, and efficiency in the vagus nerve.
So high vagal tone is good.
High vagal tone is associated with exactly what you would want for a long, healthy life. Exceptionally resilient HRV, deeply suppressed systemic inflammation, optimal digestion, profound emotional resilience, and sharply enhanced cognitive function.
And low vagal tone.
Low vagal tone is the universal hallmark of the full spectrum of chronic stress pathology.
And the mechanics of this tie together into a recursive cycle. It's a literal feedback loop that can either lift you up or drag you down. Let's walk through the negative loop first, because unfortunately, this is where a huge portion of the population lives.
Sadly, yes.
Let's say you start with a dysbiotic gut, maybe from eating a highly processed diet or maybe a round of broad-spectrum antibiotics. That gut permeability increases systemic inflammation.
Right.
That inflammatory cascade travels up and physically impairs the signaling capacity of your vagus nerve, degrading your vagal tone.
And because the vagus nerve is impaired, its ability to act as a brake on the heart is compromised, causing your HRV to plummet.
Your heart starts sending incoherent, erratic, jagged signals up the afferent vagal fibers to the brain. The brain's amygdala receives those jagged signals, interprets them as an immediate biological threat.
Triggers intense anxiety.
Exactly. And initiates the release of massive amounts of cortisol.
Yeah.
And what does cortisol do? It travels directly back down to the gut, halts digestion, disrupts gut motility, and causes even more severe dysbiosis.
It is a vicious, self-reinforcing downward spiral. One broken link in the hardware pulls down the entire system.
But, and this is the empowering part, coherence is entirely recursive in a positive direction as well.
Yes. If we connect this to the bigger picture, if you can intervene functionally at any point in that loop, you begin to lift the whole system out of the mud.
A calm, highly regulated heart rhythm directly improves vagal tone.
Robust vagal tone directly supports optimal gut motility, gastric acid secretion, and microbial balance.
Better gut function dramatically reduces systemic inflammation and stops the leakage of OPS.
Reduced neuroinflammation clears the neural noise in the brain, allowing the brain waves to synchronize.
When the brain is coherent and the prefrontal cortex is online, emotional regulation becomes effortless, which in turn supports the heart maintaining its resonance frequency coherence.
The whole system lifts together. And the critical key here is that the vagus nerve is not just a passive dead wire waiting for things to happen to it. It is highly plastic and can be actively manually influenced by your conscious behavior.
Yes, you can manually hack the superhighway.
You can.
Think about your own breathing right now as you listen to this. Are you breathing shallowly into your chest? Are your shoulders tense? Just by shifting to slow, deep diaphragmatic breathing, particularly with an extended exhale, you enact a direct hardware intervention.
You are manually stimulating the parasympathetic branch of the vagus nerve, forcing the vagal tone to improve, which sends a wave of coherence through the entire three-part system.
Exactly. But before we get deeply into the specific protocols for building that coherence, we must unflinchingly examine the saboteurs.
We have to.
Now that we understand exactly how delicate, chemically complex, and interconnected this three-way network is, we have to look at what modern life is doing to actively tear it apart. And the most ubiquitous, inescapable saboteur we face in contemporary society is the cortisol problem.
Cortisol, the primary stress hormone. Now, we have to be clear, cortisol itself isn't biologically evil.
Right. In short, acute bursts. It is absolutely essential for survival, focus, and peak physical performance. It mobilizes glucose, dilates your pupils, gets you ready to move.
If a tiger jumps out of the bushes or a car swerves into your lane, you want a massive spike of cortisol.
But the problem is chronic, unremitting cortisol elevation. It's the persistent, low-level activation of the stress response triggered by emails, traffic, news cycles, financial worry.
We are constantly bathing our delicate internal hardware in a highly caustic chemical designed strictly for acute emergencies.
And the cumulative physiological damage of chronic cortisol exposure is staggering.
It really is. At a cellular level, it aggressively suppresses your immune function by reducing the proliferation of T cells.
It degrades the tight junctions in your intestinal lining, causing leaky gut.
Dramatically lowers HRV by suppressing parasympathetic vagal tone. Functionally impairs the prefrontal cortex, locking you out of rational thought.
It fragments your sleep architecture so you can't reach delta waves.
But perhaps most alarmingly, chronic cortisol actively reduces hippocampal neurogenesis.
The hippocampus. That's for learning and memory, right?
Yes, cortisol literally suppresses the expression of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, halting the brain's ability to grow new neurons and form new synaptic connections. It causes the hippocampus to physically shrink.
Wow, it physically shrinks your brain.
It does. Cortisol rarely announces itself with a massive cinematic panic attack. It usually manifests as this insidious, grinding, low-grade anxiety. You have difficulty concentrating, poor recovery from exercise, broken sleep, and you find yourself constantly craving quick energy sources like sugar and highly processed carbohydrates.
Which brings us directly to the second massive saboteur of the system: refined sugar.
A huge disruptor.
Refined sugar is arguably one of the most under-recognized, legally ubiquitous disruptors of whole-body coherence, precisely because it attacks all three systems simultaneously. In the gut, high doses of refined sugar act as a targeted fertilizer for opportunistic, pathogenic bacteria and yeast like Candida.
While simultaneously starving the beneficial GABA-producing bacteria that require complex plant fiber, you can completely shift your microbial balance toward massive dysbiosis in a matter of days just by adopting a high-sugar diet.
And while it is systematically destroying the gut microbiome below, sugar is wreaking absolute havoc in the brain above.
Massive havoc. The consumption of highly refined sugar produces massive, unnatural dopamine spikes in the brain's reward centers, followed rapidly by severe dopamine crashes.
Just like illicit substances.
Exactly. The neurological pathways involved completely mirror the reward cycle of highly addictive illicit drugs. This extreme fluctuation drives compulsive overconsumption and fundamentally blunts your brain's natural dopamine receptor sensitivity.
Because the receptors just downregulate to protect themselves.
Yes, and when they downregulate, it destroys the sustainable baseline motivation you need to accomplish difficult daily tasks. Furthermore, in the heart and vascular system, chronic sugar consumption drives advanced glycation end products, systemic inflammation, and insulin resistance.
And insulin resistance violently reduces HRV.
And causes widespread autonomic nervous system dysfunction. We are increasingly viewing Alzheimer's disease as type 3 diabetes because of how profoundly insulin resistance destroys brain coherence.
Wait, I have to pause here and put this into a real-world context because this is huge. Think about the cultural cliche of stress eating. You have a terrible day at work, you're flooded with anxiety, so you come home and eat half a pint of ice cream. When people do that, they're actually creating a devastating double whammy on their coherence network.
Right? A total double whammy.
You have the stress cortisol degrading the hippocampus, shrinking the brain, and destroying vagal tone. And autonomously, simultaneously, the sugar is actively attacking the gut lining, spiking inflammation, and crashing the dopamine system. You are hitting the hardware with a hammer from two different angles.
It is a compounding, catastrophic metabolic drain. The glucose roller coaster, that rapid, unnatural elevation in blood sugar followed by the inevitable hypoglycemic decline, directly impairs cognitive function and emotional stability in the hours following consumption.
So mental clarity is strictly a product of metabolic stability.
Yes. If your cellular metabolism is crashing, your coherence is crashing. There is no positive affirmation strong enough to overcome severe hypoglycemia.
Okay, let's look at the third saboteur: electromagnetic and environmental stressors.
This one is controversial but important.
We just spent significant time talking about how the heart and the brain fundamentally operate through highly sensitive electromagnetic signaling, and the gut relies on bioelectric communication. So it makes total sense that these systems require a relatively clean electromagnetic environment to function optimally.
Absolutely.
Chronic, close proximity exposure to non-native EMFs. Things like sleeping with a wireless device inches from your head, working constantly under flickering artificial lighting, bathing your eyes in blue light after sunset. This is an incredibly important emerging area of research.
It strongly intersects with autonomic nervous system dysregulation and the severe suppression of melatonin production in the pineal gland.
How does it actually work at a cellular level, though?
The science is continuously developing, but research points to the activation of voltage-gated calcium channels in our cells.
Voltage-gated calcium channels.
Yes. When these channels are artificially stimulated by unnatural electromagnetic frequencies, it causes an influx of intracellular calcium, leading to the massive production of free radicals and oxidative stress.
And that damages the mitochondria, the energy powerhouses of the cells, which reduces the overall metabolic energy available for maintaining coherence.
Exactly. The precautionary principle is vital here. Aggressively reduce unnecessary close proximity EMF exposure, especially in your sleep environment, to support the delicate signaling of the heart-brain axis.
Keep the phone out of the bedroom.
Please.
And finally, we must address the most profound, deeply rooted saboteur of all, chronic psychological stress and trauma.
This is the deepest one.
Whether trauma stems from a single, horrific, acute event, or the accumulated weight of chronic developmental adversity, it creates persistent, structural autonomic dysregulation.
The nervous system literally learns a defensive threat posture and holds it indefinitely, long after the original threat has passed.
So you're constantly in hypervigilance. The amygdala searching for danger, the vagal brake permanently disabled, that has to consume enormous metabolic resources.
Unsustainable resources. It degrades all three intelligent systems over time, creating a baseline state of profound incoherence that no amount of positive thinking can override.
No amount of positive thinking can override. That is absolutely crucial to understand. You cannot simply stand in front of a mirror and repeat positive affirmations to convince a severely traumatized nervous system that it is safe.
Because the danger signal is firing below the level of conscious thought. Processing trauma is not an optional side quest for achieving coherence, it is foundational.
And because the threat response is locked in the physiology, the heart rate, the gut motility, the muscle tension resolving it almost always requires working through the physical body.
You need somatic practices, targeted breath work, EMDR, physical movement, nervous system regulation-based therapies, not just cognitive talk therapy. You have to physically convince the hardware it is safe before the software can run properly.
Okay, so we know the massive saboteurs: cortisol, sugar, EMFs, trauma. We know what is actively destroying the hardware. Now, let's move from theory to application. How do we rebuild it?
We become the master builder.
Yes, the specific, scientifically validated protocols for alignment. And this is the section we really need to spend time on, diving deep into the actual mechanisms, because this is your actionable toolkit. Let's start with the most immediate accessible tool we have for nervous system regulation.
Breath work.
Breathwork is the single most powerful accessible tool for immediate coherence activation because it acts as the manual steering wheel of the autonomic nervous system.
The manual steering wheel.
Exactly. And the research specifically highlights the profound efficacy of slow, diaphragmatic breathing with an extended exhale.
Why the exhale specifically?
The underlying biological mechanism here is brilliant in its simplicity. When you inhale, you stretch the lungs, which suppresses the vagus nerve slightly, allowing your heart rate to naturally speed up.
But when you exhale, the vagus nerve reactivates, releasing acetylcholine directly onto the sinoatrial node of the heart, which rapidly slows the heart rate down.
This is called respiratory sinus arrhythmia.
Yes. So by consciously extending your exhale, so it is significantly longer than your inhale, you mathematically, biochemically force your nervous system into parasympathetic rest and digest dominance.
The specific timing mentioned in the deepest heart math research is resonant frequency breathing, right? Which sits right around 5 to 6 full breaths per minute.
5 to 6 breaths, yes. And you pair that slow, rhythmic breathing with the intentional generation of a positive emotional state centered around the heart area, something like genuine gratitude or deep care.
That combination, the precise breathing frequency plus the heart-centered emotion, produces those highly organized, rolling 0.1 hertz sine waves in your HRV. The jagged, chaotic lines smooth out perfectly.
It's beautiful to see on a monitor. And there are other highly effective breath tools, too, like box breathing, used by elite military units.
Equal counts of inhale, hold, exhale, hold.
Right. And the physiological sigh, popularized by neurobiologists, the physiological sigh is a double inhale through the nose to fully inflate the alveoli in the lungs, followed by a long, slow, sweeping exhale through the mouth. It immediately offloads carbon dioxide and rapidly decreases autonomic arousal.
The absolute key variable with breathwork, however, is not intensity, but consistency.
Right.
Doing a breathing exercise once a week will produce a temporary, pleasant shift. But engaging in a dedicated daily practice actually produces structural neuroplastic changes in your vagal pathways.
It physically resets your autonomic baseline. Over time, the biological threshold for entering coherence lowers. Your nervous system deeply learns the physical pathway to coherence, creating a muscular memory of calm, and it can return to that regulated state much more rapidly when you are inevitably exposed to stress.
And speaking of structural biological changes, we have to talk about sleep architecture. Because sleep isn't just a passive state where you turn off the machine. It is a highly active, metabolically demanding recovery window for all three systems. We need to go deep into what actually happens in your brain when you sleep.
Absolutely. The groundbreaking research of Dr. Macon Niedergard on the glymphatic system is absolutely crucial here.
The glymphatic system.
Yes. During deep, slow-wave sleep, those slow, sweeping delta waves we mentioned in the very beginning, an incredible physical transformation occurs in the brain.
What happens?
The glial cells, specifically astrocytes, literally shrink in physical volume by up to 60%.
That cells physically shrink.
They do. And this dramatic cellular shrinkage opens up the interstitial spaces between the brain cells, allowing a massive tide of cerebrospinal fluid to rush through the brain tissue.
Like a power wash.
Exactly like a power wash. This fluid literally washes the brain, flushing out the toxic metabolic byproducts that have accumulated throughout the waking day. This includes the highly efficient clearance of amyloid beta proteins.
And amyloid beta proteins are the exact plaques heavily associated with severe neurodegeneration and Alzheimer's disease.
Exactly. So if you are not getting sufficient deep delta wave sleep, this toxic metabolic trash is literally accumulating in your brain tissue, causing massive oxidative stress and impenetrable neural noise.
Not to mention, while your brain is getting power washed, your gut microbiome is undergoing massive cellular repair, and your HRV typically reaches its highest peak of parasympathetic recovery.
Sleep is foundational. Chronic sleep disruption, whether from revenge scrolling on your phone in bed, circadian disruption from bright lights, heavy alcohol consumption, it degrades your coherence capacity at the deepest root level.
You cannot out-supplement, out-biohack, or out-meditate chronic sleep deprivation. You have to fix the foundation.
Which brings us directly to the chemical foundation of the gut-brain axis: nutrition and microbiome support.
Yes, every single dietary choice you make, every piece of food you swallow, is a direct data input into the complex gut-brain-heart communication network. A coherent supportive diet must absolutely emphasize high volumes of dietary fiber from diverse plant sources.
Because human beings cannot digest fiber. But that's the point, right? Fiber is the primary food source that feeds the highly beneficial neurotransmitter-producing bacterial populations in the lower intestine.
Exactly. When they ferment fiber, they produce short-chain fatty acids like butyrate, which deeply nourish the gut lining and cross the blood-brain barrier to reduce neuroinflammation.
You need fermented foods to continuously introduce live, beneficial organisms. You need high-quality omega-3s, specifically EPA and DHA, which actively resolve neuroinflammation in the brain.
And you need dense polyphenols from colorful, dark plant foods like blueberries, dark chocolate, green tea, which act as selective prebiotics, feeding the precise lactobacillus and bifidobacterium species that synthesize your calming GABA. And of course, adequate protein to supply the amino acid precursors, like tyrosine and tryptophan, required to actually build those neurotransmitters. And we know exactly what to minimize to protect the hardware. Refined sugar, ultra-processed food packed with emulsifiers that destroy the gut lining, industrial seed oils, artificial additives.
You have to protect the gut environment.
Next on the Coherence protocol list is physical movement. We don't just exercise to look good. Muscle contraction acts as an endocrine organ. Exercise physically massages the vagus nerve, powerfully improves HRV, reduces systemic inflammation, and actively promotes that crucial hippocampal neurogenesis we were losing to chronic cortisol exposure.
Movement is medicine.
But the next two protocols are where the science gets incredibly fascinating and almost futuristic. Let's dive deep into frequency and sound.
Yes. Specific acoustic frequencies have a measurable, profound, and rapid effect on the autonomic nervous system and brainwave state. The research specifically highlights the utility of binaural beats.
Binaural beats. This is not some new age woo-woo concept, right? This is established, measurable acoustic neuroscience.
Very established. A binaural beat occurs when two slightly different tonal frequencies are presented to each ear separately through headphones.
So like a 300 hertz tone in the left ear and a 310 hertz tone in the right ear.
Exactly. And the brain, specifically a region in the brainstem called the superior olivary complex, perceives the mathematical difference between those two tones. In this case, 10 hertz.
The brain hears the map.
It does. The brain then attempts to entrain its own electrical brainwave state to match that exact 10 hertz difference. So you can actively, non-pharmacologically use audio to nudge your brain toward the alpha relaxation range, the theta insight range, or even the deep delta sleep range.
Music layered with specific harmonic frequencies and rhythms that approximate human resonance breathing rates around 60 beats per minute is a massively underutilized, highly effective tool for rapid coherence induction.
It's powerful.
That is just incredible. You are literally tuning your brainwaves using math and sound.
Math and sound.
And finally, the protocol that fascinated me the most, because it connects us to the larger environment, nature and grounding.
This is a beautiful piece of the puzzle.
We already know that exposure to natural environments, like the practice of forest bathing, Shinrin-yoku, produces rapid, measurable drops in circulating cortisol, lowers blood pressure, and causes spikes in natural killer cells.
The phytoncides released by trees actively upgrade our immune systems. But the research goes a step further into the physics of grounding, or earthing.
Direct, bare-skin physical contact with the surface of the Earth.
Yes, because the Earth acts as a massive reservoir of free electrons, carrying a negative electrical charge. Preliminary biophysical research shows that this direct physical contact allows an influx of free electrons into the body.
And these electrons act as potent natural antioxidants. They neutralize positively charged free radicals, rapidly reduce acute and systemic inflammation, and powerfully improve HRV.
And if we connect this grounding concept to the bigger picture of electromagnetic frequencies, we discover something truly profound. The Earth itself acts as an electromagnetic cavity, and it operates at a baseline resonant electromagnetic frequency of approximately 7.83 hertz.
7.83 hertz.
This planetary frequency is known in physics as the Schumann resonance. It is generated by global lightning strikes exciting the cavity between the Earth's surface and the ionosphere.
Wait, 7.83 hertz. Think about what we discussed in the first section. 7.83 hertz perfectly aligns with the exact boundary between human alpha and theta brainwaves.
Exactly.
The exact neurological states of deep relaxation, super learning, and creative insight.
Precisely. The evolutionary and biological interaction between human nervous systems and the Earth's baseline electromagnetic environment is an exploding frontier area of biophysics. For millions of years, human biology evolved in direct physical and electromagnetic contact with that 7.83 hertz frequency.
When you ground yourself, you are electrically, physically tuning your incredibly sensitive internal nervous system back to the baseline frequency of the planet you evolved on.
These protocols, breath work, sleep, microbiome nutrition, acoustic entrainment, and grounding, are not just self-help platitudes. They are direct, targeted physical interventions to rebuild your internal hardware at the cellular and electromagnetic level.
Wow. Okay, let's bring this all together. What does this actually mean for your life tomorrow morning? True coherence, as the science so clearly emphasizes, is not some permanent enlightened finish line that you cross once and then maintain effortlessly forever while floating on a cloud.
No, it is a highly dynamic, constantly shifting equilibrium.
It's a set of daily habits, practices, and physical inputs that keep your three biological systems operating within a resilient, synchronized range. At a highly practical level, what this looks like is that you can experience a stressful event, like that ambiguous email from your boss, without being completely biologically overwhelmed by it.
You can feel a strong, uncomfortable emotion without losing access to the rational thought of your prefrontal cortex.
Your gut gives you a reliable, calm, intuitive signal instead of just blasting you with chronic anxiety that has no actual target. Your sleep is deep, restorative, and clears the metabolic trash from your brain. Your baseline state becomes calm, curious, and present,
rather than constantly braced for catastrophic impact. And that profound level of resilience is exactly what the human nervous system is capable of when you stop disrupting it with saboteurs and start actively supporting its design.
The brain is not the unilateral foundation of consciousness. The coherent, synchronized alignment of the brain, the heart, and the gut is the foundation.
Everything built on top of that biological foundation, your sensory perception, your high-level creativity, your emotional intelligence, empathy, joy, all of it depends entirely on the structural, electrical, and chemical integrity of the hardware below it.
Fix the hardware, clear the neural noise, and everything else becomes functionally possible. This raises such an important point as we wrap up this deep dive. The body is not a collection of isolated parts. It is one vast, unimaginably complex, integrated communication network. You were not designed to be fragmented.
This raises an important question for everyone listening to this right now. The question is no longer whether you can achieve coherence. Your body is biologically built for it. It desperately wants to return to that state.
The critical question is whether the physical, chemical, and emotional inputs you are actively giving your system on a daily basis are working toward that alignment or fighting against it.
You have to prioritize protocols over platitudes. You have to rely on physiological evidence and hardware interventions over relying on inspiration alone.
The dial is entirely in your hands, but you have to understand the instrument before you can tune it. And I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to ponder today, something that builds on everything we just discussed about the boundaries of the human body. If your physical heart has a massive, measurable electromagnetic field that is currently physically influencing the neural processing and brain waves of the person sitting next to you, and if your gut bacteria are literally synthesizing the chemicals that dictate your baseline anxiety, your drive, and your personality, where do you actually begin and end?
That's a beautiful thought.
What if that mystical, unexplainable intuition you've always felt isn't some magical, ethereal sixth sense, but just high-fidelity, incredibly accurate biological data traveling at lightning speed up your vagus nerve from a highly coherent gut and a deeply resonant heart? The next time you have a strong gut feeling, remember, it might not be magic. It might just be 500 million enteric neurons trying to send you an urgent, life-saving message. Tune the dial, fix the hardware, stay grounded. See you on the next deep dive.